This is the Data Slice, hosted by the Data Science Alliance. It's where we sit down to talk all things data science, AI, and tech, any way you slice it.
I'm Callan Hoffman, and joining us today is Andy Ballester. Super excited to have Andy join us today to talk about all sorts of things. He is the CPO of EyePop.AI and a co-founder of GoFundMe's. So we have lots to talk about, especially within the startup industry. So Andy, thanks for coming on the podcast. How are you doing today?
Great. Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, we're excited to hear from you. So I know I just said your titles briefly, but to kind of get us started, could you tell us, just a little more about you and kind of what your path was to where you are today with EyePop?
Yeah, absolutely. So currently I'm the Chief Product Officer and co-founder of EyePop.AI. And at EyePop, we want to make it easy for any team to add computer vision, no matter how much machine learning background you have. And with a simple call, our SDKs let you analyze images, videos, or live streams. And so that's been a really fun experience starting this company. And I know we'll chat about that later. But how I got here was, I'll stick to some of the more relevant parts of my career. I went to school at the University of Illinois in Urbana-Champaign. I was a computer engineer, which at the time, in the early 2000s really meant you're an electrical engineer with some coding ability and focus on hardware. I did a startup in school in the web space and at the time that was relatively new space, and so that was really cool. It let me pay for school, but it also let me see the magic of bringing a technology that was fairly inaccessible to the audience we were serving, which was getting things on the web, and just see how magical that was to folks who just didn't feel like they could do anything with the web at the time. And so we were serving used car dealers and allowing them to put their inventories on the internet. And at the time, a lot of our users at these dealerships, their only access to the internet was one machine, like in the back of the dealership. They didn't even have internet at home. So this is pretty wild stuff for them at the time. And I think, there's some things there that shaped parts of my career and the accessibility to technology. I came out to San Diego after school, and my wife and I were dating at the time. We came out here. We're like, we'll stay for maybe a year. And now it's 22 years later. We're still here. It's a great place. But I joined a startup here. It was a really tough time in 2003 to get a job in software development, which is what I decided to go into. So I'd go on to never really use my degree at all. But I found a startup here around the mobile and social net space. I met a lot of great people there. And then after that journey, started create a fund, which would later become GoFundMe, with somebody I worked with at one of those original startups, Brad Damphouse, and we started that here in San Diego. And so that was amazing. We worked on that for 7.5 years, and got to see 4 years of really lean times. And it was a grind. We were trying to make it happen, but there was a lot of just in technology barriers and things we had to overcome in the product. After 4 years, we finally experienced hyper growth, and then it was 3.5 years of just holding on for dear life and building a team around that concept and making sure the product is doing the right thing in the world. And so that was exciting. After I left the day-to-day at the very tail end of 2015, I became a mentor for startups here in San Diego. I'm still on the board of GoFundMe to this day, so I do that as well. And through that mentorship, I got to meet some just incredible people helping out the tech ecosystem here in San Diego. So that's been incredible. I got to meet tons of different companies and hopefully help them a little bit on the way. And that's how I got to learn about the problem in computer vision. So this would have been more about 3.5 years ago, where we saw a cohort of startups go through Launch Factory and just saw how hard it was to implement, AI around images and video at the time. And we developed a platform to make that easier for startups that don't have machine learning experience. And so that's my journey right now. And it's been fun to be a part of AI during this time. It's a very turbulent space and changing really rapidly. And so lots of fun opportunities and great technologies to play with.
Yeah, wow. What is it like now to look at GoFundMe? It's very well known, So what is it like to have been there from the beginning and now look back and kind of see where it is today?
Yeah, it's incredible. I'm humbled all the time. We just celebrated the 15th year anniversary of GoFundMe as a brand. And near that announcement, we hit $40 billion in help we've delivered to folks. And so it's so humbling to be a part of that and to stay connected to the story. And so where I can, I like to try to give back and help both the mission at GoFundMe and I've opened up that mission to like larger philanthropy. And after the day-to-day at GoFundMe, started a foundation in the housing and climate space, which allows me to stay connected to giving and philanthropy, even though I'm not part of the company anymore directly.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, so clearly from the whole story you've walked us through, you have a lot of experience with startup and you mentor people through it now and all of that. So when it comes to startups, kind of talking about what that experience is like for you, what was it like, having a co-founder, kind of deciding to work with another person, kind of from scratch, from the ground up? What is that kind of like? And do you have advice when it comes to kind of picking a co-founder?
Yeah, absolutely. So I glossed over some of the other startups that I did for a while that either didn't make it or just, I did for a short enough amount of time that it didn't make sense to bring up. But all of the co-founders I've ever worked with are people I've worked with before. And especially people I've worked with in high pressure situations. And so I've seen I've seen how they work. They've seen how I work. We know that we have complementary skills. And so I think some of the things I look for there are, is this going to be a fruitful partnership? Is this somebody I can trust? And there's so much trust, especially in the early days of startup life. But then once you start to grow, you have to trust that person implicitly for a lot of reasons. One is there's just a lot of temptations to do the wrong thing or things that would be easy, but not good for the company later on. And so you want to know that they have your back and the company's back and make sure they're doing right by your team. But there's also, there's just also a lot of things that you won't be able to keep your eye on as companies grow, as startups get more complex and bigger and are growing faster. You have to divide and conquer at some point because you're never going to have enough attention to put on everything. And so you have to make sure that they're really good at whatever they do and you can trust whatever they're doing over on their side of responsibilities. And they have to be able to trust you too. So I think that's all really important. I've never had the opportunity to work in an experience where I founded something with somebody I hadn't known before. And but I've worked with a lot of startups that are doing that, and they're relatively new relationship between the founders, and they have to build that trust over time. And it's, I think, a really interesting dynamic that I would find probably particularly challenging.
Yeah. When it comes to building a team, beyond co-founder, picking, especially in the early days, maybe when you're bringing on the first couple more people to your team, would you say it's kind of a similar mindset, or is there kind of a different approach to building the team?
Yeah, I like to think of those early employees as extended co-founders. And certainly at GoFundMe, one of the, I guess, traumatic experiences Brad and I had at some previous startups is in the 2000s. There was this culture, especially among early stage startups, to just not pay your employees at some point if you can't make payroll or pay in IOUs and all these other things. And we just knew we never wanted to be in that position. So we kept the team, just Brad and I, for a really long time until we knew where the next paycheck was coming from. But then when we were there and we're like, it's time to grow the team, we also were in a position where we didn't have a lot of time to go and hire the perfect person in a big, call out to the community. We had to find somebody immediately that we knew was going to do well in that position. And our first 2 employees were just fantastic people we've worked with in the past. We also similarly trusted them. We knew they were fantastic at what they did, and they could just run with the departments we gave them. And so our first 2 hires were very much like hiring additional co-founders.
Okay, yeah, that's interesting. Of that you guys waited for the right time. It sounds like, where it felt right to bring in more people.
Yeah, absolutely. I think especially throughout GoFundMe's journey, because we were a bootstrapped company and because we wanted to grow that company organically, we wanted to make sure that we weren't hiring anybody until we knew we needed them. So that I guess allowed us to, but also forced us to remain really lean. And so that team, we all wore a ton of different hats, and we all cared deeply about the mission. And it was a small and very productive team. And it was a great experience. I think we did the culture right there.
Yeah. Well, I know you mentioned the tech ecosystem in San Diego as a whole, beyond, even just your own organization, your own team. What have you kind of experienced in San Diego that you feel like is maybe unique to the community here, or really, a pro to being in San Diego specifically?
Yeah, one of the things I love about this ecosystem is it's extremely collaborative. I give talks and talk to startups in a lot of different cities and their own kind of ecosystems of, like, sometimes they're part of accelerators and things like that. And oftentimes there is a much more sort of zero sum or mercenary sort of thought processes for founders. And I have not seen that so much in San Diego. Everyone's really willing to work together and collaborate and share ideas. And so I think that that's fairly unique to our ecosystem. I love working in that sort of environment. I love working in an environment where the tech ecosystem is growing. And so if you compare, 2008, when we started Create a Fund in San Diego, to now, there are so many more resources available to founders that are starting out and want to learn about the startup journey that we just didn't have back then. And so that part's also similarly amazing. I do think there are some challenges in San Diego. We're a physically big city, and so there's a lot of stuff that I live, more central, like closer to downtown, and so there's a lot of things always happening up north in the tech ecosystem that I'm like, it's like,
yeah,
at least an hour away. Yes. And so I think, but I do think it's important for people, even in the technology space, to get together in the same room and share ideas. And so I think I personally find that very challenging sometimes, but I think that's something that we need to figure out. And I do think that, because of how widespread we are as a community, there are just a lot of concepts here. There's a lot of different incubators. There's a lot of different mentorship groups, and just folks you can listen to. So good thing and bad thing, I guess, on that one.
Yeah. Pros and cons.
Yeah.
Well, like you said, it's grown a lot, and things are changing rapidly. So do you have thoughts for people who are maybe newer to the industry? We are coming up on graduation season, so maybe people are really new to the workforce.
Yeah.
Do you have advice for them, if they're maybe trying to get involved in the startup industry?
Yeah, in San Diego, there's lots of great places you can go to learn about events. There's Startup Beach, which is now Eventship. They have stuff all the time. Social Coyote, Neil Bloom's always putting things out that you can go to. So there, Connect, EvoNexus, so many ecosystems you can connect into and just get into the startup world and start learning. And so so I'd say just, start by going to an event, go to a meetup, go to one of these conferences. We do, San Diego Tech Week and Tech Month every year. That's a great one to get it started in place. Talk to startup founders. Actually, I've seen a lot of folks just have success reaching out on LinkedIn to startup founders here in San Diego. And just getting on their calendar. It might not be something that they have time for immediately, but
Yeah.
even just to be able to have a coffee with somebody and pick their brain in the industry that you're curious about, I think is always a really big help for people new to the workforce.
Totally. Yeah, well, diving a little more into startups and products and your experiences. I know we've briefly touched on iPop and GoFundMe. I'm curious, going into these startups, what was kind of the original vision? Did you have specific goals? Would you say it's important to have a really specific goal going into a startup? Because obviously, like you said, things can change. So what was that kind of like for you?
Yeah, for both, we had specific goals. I would say those goals you have to allow change over time to what you originally expected, because your plan is never going to be perfect product market fit with what people need. And so I think there's an underlying mission to what you're trying to solve there that you should stay true to. But the implementation and how that plan happens is, you have to be really open to how things change. At GoFundMe, I think it's interesting. The initial mission we had was to help people financially by helping them save. And so our first product was actually called Coin Piggy. We turned it was essentially a gamification around savings. And at the time, we saw a lot of our friends and coworkers who had high car payments and just put a lot of stuff on their credit cards. Brad and I being like just frugal East Coast folks, I bought my first car in cash. It was terrible. Like I didn't know anything on it. And I didn't have a credit card at the time. And we just wanted to teach people how to save. And so we made it really fun and gamified. But fintech was just not ready for a small startup to do that. And the only way to do that was with these relatively large interchange fees. So it didn't make sense to help people save, but you're paying, kind of 3% on the way in. It's like kind of the worst savings account ever. So at that point, we had a use case in there where one of our hero use cases that you build mockups around is, all right, what if I wanted to save up for a TV? Well, that's great. We want you to have that TV, and maybe we can help you get a discount on that TV later on as the product grows. But you would be putting money in, but like, what if my aunt wanted to kick in $20 for my birthday? Well, that's great. We should enable that. And one of the things Brad and I have done really well throughout our careers is enabling viral loops. And so we liked the sharing mechanic of that. And so we said, what if the product was just that? What if it was people coming together to save up collectively for something? And what would that look like? And what were the types of things they would save up for? And actually that was where we started Create a Fund. And the concepts we had at the time were actually very similar to what we thought, or what GoFundMe would end up becoming. The funny part there is we really pivoted quite a lot in the Create a Fund days. And so we actually went away from that for a year and a half. And then ended up coming back to our original concept there and just figuring out how to enable it. And we didn't want to leave that space, but it was really hard to monetize because there's just not a good way to split payments or have any sort of business model on the fintech at the time. And keep in mind, this is now like 17 years ago. So very different space in the fintech world. We didn't have fun things like Stripe at the time. And so I would say there, it's interesting because even though we pivoted several times, we actually came back to our original idea and had success with it. And maybe we were just too early to the party on that one. At EyePop, I think similarly, I want to stay true to the concept of how do we make visual AI as accessible as possible to startups and to developers who don't necessarily know how to input tensors into a model, but they know how to build products, and they know they want the insights and data that can come out of video and images. And so the actual modality about how we deliver that is changing all the time. That landscape is constantly evolving in the tools that we can offer to folks. And so we started off with a really simple vision of how to do that. And we've evolved now several times over into where now we're creating a video agent this quarter that anyone will be able to pick up off the shelf and use for their product. So that's a far cry different than the web APIs we started with, but it's where where the market is demanding us to move. And also it's exciting we get to offer that much intelligence to startups.
Yeah. Yeah, you're all of these different startups, and even it sounds like the one you mentioned that you were doing in college, it sounds like all of these really impact people and help people. Would you say that's kind of oftentimes the goal with these products you're making? It's kind of that direct impact?
Yeah, I mean, GoFundMe much more so. That was a true mission-driven company from the philanthropic stance. I think every startup founder I meet, they're trying to impact the world in a better way and to make it easier or better, or make their customers smarter, more savvy about what they're doing. And so I find that passion across the board in most founders, and but certainly that's what gets me up in the morning.
Hmm. Yeah, it makes sense. So probably, yeah, everyone's really passionate, whatever the product may be, passionate about it and have a mission at heart to some extent. Have you experienced, once the product is out, have you experienced people, customers maybe using your product in ways that you did not envision or did not expect? And do you have an approach to that situation?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you're always going to have some degree of that, and in good ways and bad ways. Like, I love when a customer comes up with a truly novel way to use the product for good in a way that I never had envisioned on Figma or in our in our normal user journey sort of write-ups. It's always incredible to see like how creative people get with things. And at GoFundMe, we certainly saw people using the product in all kinds of fun ways to raise money for great missions that we just wouldn't have expected, or plugging that into other audiences that like didn't even exist when we were building the product. Like, we had an influencer on Twitch raising money by playing video games, and he was able to raise just an incredible amount of money on Twitch for GoFundMe campaigns. And so we didn't even think that was a possibility in the early days. And really they just made that happen. And so like there's so many fun use cases like that. And then there's always people who try to break the system or game the system. And you do have to be cognizant of that and have enough data coming in that you're evaluating on a regular basis to know where those exceptions are. And then the flexibility to put rules in place where you can make sure you're keeping your community safe and your brand safe. But it's not putting too many limits on the people using it the right way or in creative ways.
Yeah, definitely. It's kind of tricky almost. It sounds like sometimes dealing with it's like that fine line. When it comes to making these products, or maybe, even just once they're deployed, keeping an eye on them. Are there ethical considerations that you think are really important, when it kind of just comes to innovation, especially like you said, in today's day and age with the tech just endlessly growing, it feels like, are there specific ethical considerations that you think are especially important with startups?
Yeah, I think I think two things really help with ethical culture in the team and making the right ethical decisions for the product and how the business goes. I think number one, aligning the business success with customer success is always a great strategy to alleviate a lot of downstream ethical concerns. And the like business school example of like gym memberships, 90% of people never use the gym the gym membership that they're paying for. And so like that would be the classic example of like anti-alignment. If everyone actually went to the gym, gym would be 10 times more full, and that type of thing. So I think by aligning your success, you can make a lot of easy decisions that are right for the customer. And so at GoFundMe, our original business model was just a straight percentage charge. It looked very much like a credit card transaction charge, and so 5% from each donation. allowed us to run the business. And so we only made money when our customers were successful. And so that allowed us to make the right decisions. And so some of the downstream effects of that were, especially at the time, a lot of folks said, why don't you put like ads on these pages? You have so many page views. And it's like, no, that's not what the product is. It's not about selling ads on somebody's campaign. It's about helping them become successful. And so that was an easy decision to not have ads. And so then, downstream from that, a lot of entry points into products selling customer data to the outside world is like through the ad model system. And so we didn't have to make those decisions because that just wasn't part of the product. And so that was pretty straightforward for us. I would say, it's never easy, but it's good, straightforward customer success based decisions that we could make around those things. But we had ethical concerns at GoFundMe because the concept of crowdfunding was very new. What we thought, people should be able to raise money for, and what society thinks people should raise money for, like these are all things that we had to figure out real time. And we were constantly convening folks within our within the team, within we bring in customers to talk about this, but revamping our terms of service. What are the lines of what you can raise money for? You can't raise money to buy weapons for a militia. We knew that, like our underlying payment processor wouldn't even allow that, even if we did. And so like those are things that were like easy, but had to be put and enforced in the terms of service. But then there is much more complicated decisions we had to make along the way. And having a team that can respond to that effectively is important, because there's always going to be new ways people think to use your product, and you have to make decisions on the fly.
Yeah.
At EyePop, we have other concerns. We deal with really critical customer data. You can imagine how precious and protective companies are about visual data, video streams coming from in their stores, in their warehouses, images coming directly from their customers. That's all really sensitive data that even, in some cases it's protected, like HIPAA compliance or other sort of PII compliance. And we have to be cognizant of that. But even if it's not technically under one of those, standard regulatory like sort of compliances, it's just something that we have to treat as incredibly important to our company. Data is just so important to every business. And so this has informed how we run that product just immensely. Our initial product was in the cloud, but one of the things that I'm most excited about in porting our runtime to more places is one of the best ways to protect visual data is just never have it leave the house. Have the AI right next to it so that it doesn't have to be uploaded to cloud. So then, less transport layers, less servers it's touching, the better. And so if you can have a video that's analyzed on premise where the video stream is being taken, if you could have that image or video being processed on the phone itself where the videos or images being taken, and it never has to leave a device, but you still get the insights out of those things. That's just super exciting to me and what we're building, but also just really important to our customers. There's also a lot of data policies that you have to implement to protect data just by determining who gets access to that data. And there's, a culture of just data importance that you need to create in these sorts of businesses. But I would say across the board, businesses, especially using AI, need to take a look at where is that data flowing. If you're using a vendor for your AI, which is really common, especially people wrap ChatGPT to do all kinds of things these days, allowing the customer to know that's where your data is going. And OpenAI and other vendors, they have different policies about what that data can be used for. Can it, do you want your data to be able to be trained on, or do you want your data as part of aggregate metrics and another system. I think in a lot of cases that's fine, but the customer should be aware that's what's happening.
Kind of the transparency.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Do you have advice for people who, maybe they're starting to see, you kind of described earlier that experience of seeing your product maybe really take off. It started as this little idea and it's starting to really grow maybe in a way that wasn't even expected.
Yeah.
And maybe more data's coming in, that type of situation. I'm sure that can be probably a little overwhelming, a little stressful and crazy. So do you have tips for when you're in that type of situation for kind of still, putting all of those ethical things like you just talked about, keeping them in focus when it's probably easy to kind of push them to the side when it just feels like there's so much happening at once?
Yeah, I think some of the things that helped us, especially in the GoFundMe growth days, was just bringing the team together on a regular basis. One of the things that I think we lose sight of as in our quest for that growth, right, is everyone's talking about, okay, when is it going to catch fire? When is it going to hit? When are we going to go viral and have that hockey stick like growth? But I find relatively few sources talking about how hard it is to grow. Growing the life in a growing business, especially a small growing business, is so much harder than when it's stagnant or even when it's in decline. Like you would think that would be the most stressful, but I actually think growth is way more stressful because you're often trying to hire and do right by the product and fix bugs and do all these other things, attend to customer needs all at the same time. And that just puts a lot of pressure on the team. And so being aware of that and understanding that growth should, should, and is hard on the system. And allowing people to talk about how hard it is in that space that you have as a company, and covering for each other and making sure everyone's doing well and not facing burnout. Those are all things that we thought about a lot, and we talked about it every week at some of our all hands as a company. And it was important to us because it is tough on the system, and it's tough in different ways at different times. Sometimes there are customer fires that take precedent over everything else you're doing, and other times it's tech crises or product crises, and everyone's gonna get their fair share of hardship and obstacles that they have to overcome while growing.
Yeah. When you were talking about the whole team, it had me thinking, have you ever experienced maybe misalignment or conflict or disagreement in your teams where, especially maybe it's during a time like that? Do you have experiences and thoughts on that type of situation and kind of working through that challenge?
Yeah, I think at GoFundMe we kept it so lean, and everyone was bought into the mission that so deeply that those conversations were never taken personally, and we had great constructive conversations about, this is where we need to take the product next, or this is what we should do to serve this one customer issue or a family of customer issues. And so I found that it was just very straightforward and easy to have those conversations in that culture. We did a great job there. In other startups I've been a part of, especially earlier in my career, there were a lot of contentious situations around growth of finger pointing when the numbers dipped a little bit, or blaming a department for not keeping up with their work and things like that, and just having it devolve into a lot of politics and interpersonal arguments that were not constructive. And so I'd say keep your feedback internal to the team, very, very based in data and what we need to do next. Listen to each other. And there's a lot of great ideas that, did not come from Brad and I and GoFundMe, and currently in EyePop, great ideas that come from the team or from customers. And you have to be open to those things.
Mm-hmm. That was very good advice, probably for any team in any industry, really.
Yeah.
Well, I know you mentioned earlier mentorship. I've also obviously been asking you for lots of advice for our listeners. So kind of on that topic of mentorship, how has that affected you in your career path? Has there been a mentor that really had an effect on your journey throughout all of this?
Yeah, I've certainly had CEOs and just senior management that I've looked up to that have shaped how I think about things. In fact, I just did a live workshop yesterday at a conference, and one of the things that went through my head beforehand was some of the advice that I got real my first startup when I was in my 20s about presenting and how to present and like just how to bring energy to a presentation. And so definitely things I think about all the time from early mentors. But I would say this is I don't know what you even call this, but I would say like my co-founders have all been mentors to me as well. I think I've learned immensely from co-founders, and even though you're really more at a peer level, and I hope they learned more, tons of things from me too. Like I found a lot of value in working really closely with somebody in the trenches there.
Is there any advice that they've given you, or maybe not just advice, but just approaches they've taken that have really inspired you or maybe changed your approach to things?
Oh yeah. I mean, I have over the years, I've had endless debates with my co-founder Brad Damphouse about product development, because we both came to product development separately from different paths. I came to it from a more technology-based path. He came from it more from the design angle. And one of the things that Brad has really like shaped my product career and is we call it the big button, and it's every page to have like just one clear action that is the right thing that you should be doing, especially in a workflow that's critical to your funnel. All products, especially digital products, have a very specific funnel you would want to walk through, and you just need to make it feel correct. And so it should be the thing that visually jumps out at you on the screen. When I walk through startups that I mentors, like critical flows, that's something that I look for a lot, is like, is it obvious to me as a user coming to this product for the first time that the most prominent thing on the screen is the correct thing that I should be doing? And is it so obvious that's like really the only thing I'm thinking about as a consumer? When there's a lot of other stuff and lots of choices, that's where we see lower conversion flows. And so I think about the funnel all the time. And as we've built viral products, the funnel is everything to a viral product. Conversion rate drop is a killer to viral products. And so that's certainly shaped me. And I think good advice for any digital product person out there.
Yeah, no, that is a good one. Do you have advice for people who maybe don't have a mentor yet, or even if, like you said, it can be a colleague, not necessarily someone, high and mighty above you, but, if maybe they just don't feel like they have anyone to learn from or look up to, do you have advice for them? Maybe they're early in their careers or something like that.
Yeah. I think, I guess in the startup world, I think it works differently in larger tech organizations or just bigger business in general. But there are always opportunities to find folks that really care about your mission and what you're trying to build and what you want to do in the future, even if it's just from hey, I want to advance technology in this particular move. I don't know what product that's going to be a part of, but I have ideas around like how things get done. There's always going to be somebody out there who cares about that, like you do, who is further along in their career. And I think getting out there and just meeting folks and having those conversations about what you're passionate about is a great way to identify those people.
On your end of things, when maybe it's a student or young professional reaching out to you, is there anything that stands out to you, whether it's they're just looking for advice or maybe they want to work with you, but are there things that you think really make someone stand out?
Yeah, in the startup world, for me, it's I just know there are tons of lessons that you don't learn until you've had to put product in place and actually build something. And so the thing that stands out most, and it might be, hey, are you hiring sort of email, or hey, can I grab a coffee sort of email, is they've built something. And I know they've gone through the hard ups and downs of actually putting something together. And so I identify a lot more with somebody who has an idea for something, but they've gone out and they built it, and maybe there's some parts of it that don't work or are vaporware, or they need to get a technical co-founder or a designer or some other professional to come and augment what they've brought to that journey. But that fact that they've gone through it and they've gone through all the pieces and they have something that is out there in the world, that is something that I find always impressive. And I can have such deeper conversations with people about specific implementation points. How did you do this? Or when you hit that, did you hit this obstacle? And how'd you overcome that obstacle? Those conversations I find a lot more meaningful than what is normally just on a resume or a LinkedIn page, because it's tough to get into thought processes and how they work and how they think about problems from just seeing a list of things they've done.
Yeah, that's fair. So they're at least doing the thing, they're
Yeah.
trying.
Yeah.
Definitely. Well, as we've kind of touched on throughout this, the tech industry, and especially, when it comes to data and AI, are evolving so much all the time. It's hard to keep up sometimes. But are there any innovations or trends in the industry right now that you're seeing that you feel especially excited or optimistic about?
Yeah, I think one of the things that people talk about in different ways, who's going to be the first billion-dollar company, those types of things. I find the ability to create just so much bigger now, because even if you just know enough marketing to be dangerous, or you just know enough design to be dangerous, that like you can really get to some really interesting, at least proof of concepts, to sell the vision. Whereas before you might have been doing that on paper or with a deck or something like that. And so getting closer to the implementation yourself is so much more interesting to me than what we had before. And it's more doable than ever. I do think the right expertise still needs to be in the room for real products. And so I think it lets you sell the vision, but then you still go and find other people at this juncture in time. But what it allows people to do is think of themselves as their own company. And it's much more about your editorial eye and your taste level, your experience in a particular problem that informs product now, than like the technical ability to make it happen. And so I would say that the opportunity is for everybody to build that editorial eye in whatever you're doing, and to know enough about different parts of your particular business to be dangerous in those other things. Even if you're not a technologist, go and learn enough to be dangerous, vibe code your way into something, learn about how servers talk to each other, learn about like how data is stored on some level, just so that you have a sense of like what you're looking for in your product. And then I think you can say that across like every discipline, right? Like same with design, same with marketing, same with building an audience in different ways.
Yeah. So much going on these days.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for coming on. It's so interesting, just to hear your perspective. You have so much experience, all the way starting back when you were in college. I know a lot of our listeners are in that phase now. So I think it's inspiring to hear from someone who was in their shoes, and you've got big shoes for them to fill now. So thank you. And I'm sure we'll have you back on the pod as things continue to progress. But thank you so much.
Well, thanks a lot. Yeah, thanks for having me.
If you enjoy this podcast, give it a rating, share it with a friend, and don't forget the Data Science Alliance is a 501c3 nonprofit, and we would appreciate your support. You can make a donation, volunteer with us, become a member, or attend our events. We have lots going on all the time here at our location in San Diego, California. Even if you're not in California, though, there are lots of ways to get involved. So go to datasciencealliance.org to get started. Otherwise, see you here next time on The Data Slice.